So welcome to the third day of my bootcamp. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to go through another different sort of presentation to go over some tips and tricks for getting kids excited about coding. And today's session we're going to be joined also by a local area teacher that I've been working with, Cheryl Steenson, so you'll get to meet her a little bit later on, and we'll go through some of the things she's been doing in her classroom with Itch, and as part of the items that we'll be going through that will help you get your kids excited about coding. So with that, first of all, I'm just going to start off with any Q&A from the last session that we had. If you remember, in our last course, we had the teachers go through and create their own course. And so I see Elizabeth's created a course, so we can take a quick look at that course. And Elizabeth, if you have any questions on that, just let me know, and we'll get you set up or change that. It looks like she hasn't made too many changes on that. So if we need to, we can come back and take a look at that. So if there's any questions on courses from anyone else, otherwise we'll jump in and get started on today's agenda for the 7 tips. Okay, so I'm going to switch over now to my presentation for getting kids interested in coding. And I have that up over here. So let me get this started. I'm just going to turn that off, and HTML view. Okay, so we're going to talk about ways in your classroom that you can kind of get your kids motivated, and things that I've seen work, and sort of tips and tricks, I guess, for getting your classroom to have the most fun with coding, and what you'd like to maybe try in your classroom. You can take away any ideas. I'm also open to hear from anyone out there. Please Twitter to me at ucodemy, and I'd love to hear any things that you've been doing in your classroom for getting kids excited about coding. So let's make that a little bigger. So I've been working in a lot of the schools in my local area, and actually sort of all through the US, where I've visited schools as well, helping teach kids coding. So just a few of the schools that I've gone and helped, like the Secondary Academy for Success, that's the school from our visiting teacher today. Hidden River is another local school. I've also participated at YMCA and Valley View and schools like that. So I've taken my courses and also my passion and fun to get kids going in coding, and brought that to local schools. So with that, we've also been able to form a partnership more closely with the Secondary Academy for Success School. They're 1 year into the program now, and the local teacher / librarian for next year is also joining us. That's Cheryl Steenson. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. She's over here on another window. So Cheryl, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. And why don't you maybe just tell us a bit about your school and what you've been doing with the program, or anything that you might like to let us know before we jump into some of the tips and tricks that I'm going to go through.
Okay, thanks so much, Jason. As you said, my name is Cheryl Steenson, and I am starting my 14th year teaching. I currently teach at Secondary Academy for Success, which is a alternative high school in the North Shore School District in Washington. And I've been at this school for 3 years now, and I have predominantly taught upper level English language arts. So coding is not my forte. I have very little experience with this. However, I taught internationally in Korea for a few years, and in that setting, I had a lot of support with the other teachers and ed tech team. And the school was a one-to-one max school. So I was expected to know how to use my technology and to incorporate it into everything I did in English. And that really changed the way I looked at how English can be taught and how I can help prepare my students. Fast forward 4 years from that experience to where I am now. And at the alternative high school, I have a lot of students who don't see themselves connected to what we teach at school. And I would argue probably a lot of kids at the traditional schools feel that way as well. And one thing that I'm really passionate about is preparing my kids for the lives they'll have after high school. And sure, some of that means preparing them for university and having rigor in the English classroom. But a more important part to me is preparing them for 21st century skills, which means making sure that whatever we do in my classroom actually relates to their lives and has some sort of meaningful and useful application. And I started that, in really simple kind of typical ways that English teachers start. So that means instead of writing an extra essay, we worked on cover letters and resumes, or we researched universities or job tracks. But I still found that I wasn't quite reaching kids in a way that was as meaningful. And that's kind of when I stumbled into this being interested in computers and where that fits, especially because my students tend to be, they spend so much time on computers, between their phones and computers and playing computer games. They see careers in computer science that we're not preparing them for in schools. And so that's when I decided I wanted to try to start looking at those gaps and how I can do that. And came across Udemy and started working with Jason and having him come into my classroom and into our school and do a few programs with our students. And next year, actually, we will have a full period of the day dedicated just to doing itch and getting our kids programming. So it's pretty exciting over just a couple years to see where this has gone and how much support we've had from funding from our parent-teacher organization to some funding from our school district. But a lot of it's come from outside forces because groups like parent-teacher foundations want to see this, even if our schools don't have the funding yet. Yeah. And of course, a very supportive principal. So that's where I'm coming from as far as where I fit as an English teacher talking about coding.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And really enjoyed working with you and looking forward to next year as well. So I think that you'll probably have a lot more stuff that you can tell everyone as we go through. So we've got 7 tips. So I'm going to try and spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes maybe on each one of these. But we'll see how we go on timing. I'm not the best sometimes. So with that, I'm trying to see why it's not switching over to my screen, but never mind. You folks can't see me, but I'm here in the flesh.
No, actually, we can see you and not the presentation now.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so I'm going to switch back over to share the presentation. That's right. This window here. There we go. Okay, how's that? Everyone see
there,
that?
And that's me with one of my students actually at the control up in front of the class right there.
Yeah, using itch to kind of like learn some stuff there. So let's just move on to our first tip before we spoil some of the surprise, I guess. So I guess my first thing that I found, and this was something I learned from a local area teacher who has a tech class. He's taught for many years. And one of the things he did with his class is always sort of start the class off and get them settled with something that's kind of, matches the mood of the kids coming into the classroom. Kids are kind of very antsy, not seated well, not maybe necessarily paying attention and whatnot. And so he very often does either a physical activity or a lot of times he'll do videos. And so what I've done is put in a bunch of videos in my courses that you can pick from in Itch. And that's a way of, like, when you get the kids in, you can get them settled. They might not necessarily be 100% focused, but a video definitely grabs their attention. So you can give them kind of like, ideas of things they need to pick out of the videos for at the end of it, so that they have a goal in mind as they're watching it. But that kind of may let you match up a video with whatever the project or the activity is for the kids as well. So a lot of times having younger kids in the videos lets them identify with them. So I've tried to build a more comprehensive library. You can also follow my videos on YouTube that I have, but I tweet out a bunch of things about videos and things that you can use. So that I find then the kids are ready to go with the activities and then the instruction and kind of get them settled, rather than trying to herd all the cats right at the start of the class. I don't know if you've had similar. I know that when we start our classes, Cheryl, that you kind of had a similar kind of experience. So I'd like to hear any thoughts that you might have on techniques. I've heard that sometimes you do some sort of interesting things at the start of your class.
Yeah, one thing, like you said, I'd like to just echo the video warm-ups. I think, all good teachers know that we have to introduce a topic, then we teach our lesson, then we do some sort of closure. And the same is true when our kids are sitting in front of a screen. And so it's really important to me to kind of get everyone's attention and get us focused. So one great thing we used when doing stop frame animation is my students love A Nightmare Before Christmas. And each year one teacher shows that. And I realized, oh, this is a perfect intro. And so I just showed the song of Jack Skellington singing, and then talked about, actually pulling that apart and showing that that is stop frame animation. There's a lot of really cool resources on YouTube. And I think as much time as I can avoid talking to my students, they'll be more interested. They hear me talk every day. So if I can do an intro with some sort of attention getter that gets them going on YouTube, it's great. The other great one is the introductions to some of the Marvel comic movies. They oftentimes have really cool graphics that are all computer generated. And so getting kids to get their brains around some of the ways that they can be creative and that they see it around them all the time. And I think that's one thing that's really helped my students, but having those kind of high intensity attention getters has been really helpful. And I think that's a skill that most teachers try to work on anyways. And so think about your lessons with computer science in the exact same way of having that intro to gain attention and to get them interested or excited.
Yeah, and I found a channel that I like to use is the TED Talks channel. So they've got a ton of great stuff. I don't know if you have a few favorites as well that you'd like to share, but I think that's one that I have as a kind of my go-to content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a specific one in mind, but I definitely have some in my email, and I'd be happy to share them so that you can share them out with teachers as they progress. And of course, mine are definitely high school minded, but I think some of them would cross over very easily with all age groups.
Okay, great. Thanks. So the next item on my list is really structure. I find structuring the lessons, for me, at least middle school and upper levels, this might apply more to, but having the program or the activity be something fun and having like more of an open outcome for the kids. So what I really mean by this is, don't give them a small kind of like simple task that is very linear in nature when you first start them on anything in computer science related. And I think a lot of activities that I see in computer science are very much like that, where it's like, go in and make the person bounce 3 squares across. And so the issue that I see with that is kids, it might be fun graphics and everything like that, but they're not using any creativity. They don't really get to explore, and they don't really feel like they're in control. And so, with my first couple of activities, I have the very first one is really not intended for you to have any outcome in mind at all, other than to play, right? And so, It's really to give the kids confidence that they can play and they can make things and not going to break the system. And so, we start with a bouncing ball activity, but the amount of code they do from the beginning for that is, about 4 blocks of code. So it's really just enough to get them to feel like they've put something together, and then to get them to experiment. And so with that experimentation, the kids really come up with some pretty fascinating things, just letting them kind of explore. And that's really the Scratch community in general. And I think that's why a lot of teachers that are looking for computer science have gravitated to Scratch, because of that open nature of allowing kids to kind of create whatever their imaginations might have. I've written a paper actually that we published not too long ago about, coding starts from the imagination. And so this is really a goal of like making sure the kids get to start with creativity. So again, I'll switch over to Cheryl and see if she has anything that you'd like to add to that.
I don't have too much to add to this. I completely agree. When my students did the introductory material to bouncing ball, I'm a very linear person. I'm very much type A, as many teachers are, but our students aren't. And so my students came up with the funniest versions of bouncing ball that I would have never thought of, whether that means there was a rainbow streaming behind the ball, or instead of a ball, there was a person, or, whatever. And I wouldn't have thought to have them, go that far. And so having a very open goal definitely helps with that. And I think one thing in the computer science classroom I need to remember, especially as a more traditional teacher who likes it when I get to talk and the kids get to listen and my classroom is very organized, is that oftentimes clues to success, as I'm wandering around the room, are laughter. My kids are making characters do silly things, and the code doesn't work, so their character just keeps running into the side of the screen, or the laughter in the classroom, or what seems like or feels like a little bit of disorder, is actually been some of the more successful moments where kids were discovering and playing. I like that Jason used that word. And so open goals and fun, especially at the beginning before we tried to put together, more difficult or more challenging projects, were really key to my classroom and getting students to buy in. And me too. I'm not necessarily entirely confident on the computer all the time. So feeling like I can just try code, and if it doesn't work, I can try again and pull out or insert new pieces of code without there being, there's no permanent consequence to this. You can just change the code. And so helping kids feel that
was, and I think
very successful.
One of the fun times I had in the class last year was when we did that augmented reality course, where the kids were like waving around in the air. So it was a pretty fun time. So that augmented reality course lets the kids kind of interact with virtual objects by using the webcam. And so you get definitely a lot of laughter and fun going on when we did that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so oh, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. So for my next kind of, actually we kind of covered this already, I guess. We've kind of dove into both, but it's more tapping into the creativity side. And that's one of the things that computer science lends itself to naturally. And so what, oh, excuse me. So, what you think of as more traditional education, sort of history and English and things like that, where they have specific outcomes. Computer science really doesn't necessarily have outcomes other than creating, projects. And those projects really can be entirely different ideas. If you look at what computer science does today, you see it in all sorts of areas. So for instance, we see it becoming in self-driving cars. We see, virtual reality. We see it in the, programs that we use from Google, but, it's starting to be things that we're wearing. I mean, I wear a watch now, my virtual watch that is essentially an entire computer that would have been in a room 20 years ago. So, we've got that creativity from the projects that we're creating can really start to be anything that kids might dream up. And so we really want to make sure we're creating projects and activities, but also that can accommodate kids' different ideas. But you also don't want to overwhelm kids with something that's way too complicated. And so you can really provide a set of differentiated kind of like outcomes for the early stage kids might only want to do the first part of the course, and then you can just have more things that they can add in. So you can always have in a game, you might have the game has one level where you have to hit the ball and break some blocks, and then the more advanced kids might actually have multiple levels where they start making the game more hard, they start to keep score, they work out if you win or lose, and all those sort of other things that some of those can be quite complicated. And so your advanced students can kind of go to that next level. So that's what I want to watch for when you can go to the other extreme, I think, too. I'm not sure if you have anything you wanted to add to that, Cheryl. I know we talked about creativity kind of a bit already.
Yeah. One of the big things that I noticed was really giving my students options and ideas. We all in our classrooms have that kid who cannot get past the choice phase. In English, that means when I say you can pick whatever creative writing story you want or story, they can't even pick a character. And then we have those other students who instantly know what they want to do and they get right into an assignment. And so part of that is balancing your assignments and making sure that there are, independent outcomes where, with coding, I've found I can have a checklist. You have to be able to do some loops or use some sort of message and response. But otherwise, you can do this in whatever way. So some students are building, word art that is going to reveal something about a poem, and then another student is retelling a story from a book that they've read. A specific example from my classroom would be doing digital storytelling. I had some students who felt very comfortable and confident to create their own stories, and I had other students who absolutely did not want to create their own stories, and they took from other stories and kind of remade a version or a scene from another story. So I had one boy who was just adamant about using The Little Prince and doing one scene from The Little Prince, versus other students who were happy to create their own characters and go off the grid as far as storyline. So making sure that kids can be successful within their comfort level and building a rubric or an assignment that allows that, those different outcomes, but still with the same learning objectives in mind.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Oops, I was on mute. Okay, great. Thanks, Cheryl. So my next bullet point is just a activity that you might consider doing when you have a new class and then working through something. Often I actually call it the playground now, is my idea around this concept. The kids might learn some skills, for instance, on how to do a digital story, which Cheryl was just talking about. And you really, as a teacher, you don't want 30 kids creating 30 different genres of stories and then having to assess those because they are so widely diverse. So within the creativity, you may want to narrow it down to 3 or 4 ideas. And so, even if it's a game, 3 or 4 different genres of games maybe that they would create, or 3 or 4 different types of stories. It might be, classical, new age, or something like that. And so what I find works well is bringing in something that we use in the industry, which is I love using the whiteboard. So, get the kids to just put all of their ideas out on the whiteboard. And then a second phase of that is maybe have them all come up to the whiteboard and they get to put a star on each one that they like. And maybe they get 3 stars each. And at the end of that, you can use the ideas that are the most popular as a kind of like a group session result that they get to, these are the 3 activities that you can choose from now that you'll get to build your projects around. And so this becomes even more sort of a useful technique when you do more advanced projects. So you might have, an entire semester project that the kids have to decide that they're going to do. And one of these that I've seen kind of pop out of that is making a digital rain gauge. And so the kids had to go through a lot of brainstorming before they came up with that idea. And for instance, another one I saw at a school, they came up with mapping the traffic patterns for the parents drop off and pick up, because their parking area was a mess. And so they actually simulated cars and parking and different areas where the parents would have to park and drive, or and what they would have to do to remark the school parking lot. So give the kids some input, and you'll be surprised at kind of the things that they might come up with in projects and activities, and then get their buy-in, I think, is maybe the main message around brainstorming.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Getting student buy-in is a key to success, and that applies to any of our classrooms. And I feel like I already said this, but the same principles apply to computer science classrooms as any classroom. Successful teachers who include students' ideas in any classroom are going to see that same exact behavior in the computer science classroom. As Jason said, this whiteboard idea, one thing I use in my classroom, and I think a lot of teachers might be familiar with, is just the idea of having a parking lot, right? So I have a big piece of colored construction paper on the wall, and I tend to use sticky notes. So this allows for a few things. Again, I teach at an alternative high school, so it allows me to maybe do a little censorship if necessary, because I can be perusing the sticky notes as students put them up. It also allows for a little anonymity. Sometimes I have kids who aren't comfortable writing in front of other students, or who don't want to write on the whiteboard because they have bad penmanship or spelling. So providing my students with a bunch of sticky notes, and we take 5 minutes, brainstorm at least 5 ideas of what we can do with this project, and then bring your sticky notes up. And then I get to look at those sticky notes. And then, like Jason said, having the kids pick 2 or 3 from that list, or maybe then we move those sticky notes into clouds of similar ideas. So we might all have a similar idea, and we have a big group that seems like that's something that's interested. Well, then that can narrow down your topics as well. If you have 10 sticky notes that are all about the same idea, for example, for stop frame animation, if we want to require on the rubric that everybody draws their own character, and I see that everybody wants to use stick figures and everyone's comfortable with that for characters, I'm comfortable with stick figures. I don't need them to use an elaborate cartoon. And if one of the things my students are voicing is concern about art, then that might come out when they feel the non-threatening situation of using the parking lot and the sticky notes. So I don't say, it's you, Gary, who doesn't want to do the art. You're the only one. Now there's 5 kids who say, I'm nervous about drawing, or I don't know how to pick art. And so it fleshes out some of the concerns as well. And that parking lot idea with the sticky notes is something that you can do once a week to see how kids are doing. You could do it for questions at the end of a lesson. Okay, we've done 2 days of itch. Can we brainstorm some of our struggles, or where we could practice more, or what we need more practice on? And that anonymity is something that the kids can continue to put things up on parking lot. You can have a few different ones going in your classroom, so that you're able to address some of the concerns, but then also grouping ideas and seeing that, classmates have the same ideas I have. And so it validates some kids, especially the kids who don't naturally put themselves out as leaders or as people who want to volunteer. They might be your most creative and most experienced computer scientists. And so getting their ideas out has been a challenge, but I think providing some of these opportunities that allow everyone's brainstorming to have equal value definitely improves the quality of the project ideas coming out of my classes.
Awesome. Yeah. I was wondering sort of an analogy of like moving your...
Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry. I was wondering an analogy of like moving your parking lot sticky notes. Maybe you put them on the speedway or the racetrack once you're ready to go. Anyway.
Absolutely. That's actually not a bad idea. I could totally create some sort of moving symbol of that. And I could see that definitely working really well, visually with maybe even an elementary or middle school level group getting to see, a car, the certain ideas moving along a track might be a lot of fun.
Yeah, or just make a game. Okay, let's move on. I could dwell on that analogy for a while. I think it's kind of fun. So uh, number 5 on my list, and I hope I'm not kind of like boring you with my numbering. If you're kind of like linear thinking, you'll probably love it, but otherwise, bear with me as we go through all of these. So another activity that I love to sort of break up the classroom is not always being online. So if you've ever, tried to teach kids computer concepts, a lot of times some of those can be really confusing because they're so virtual, right? They're really abstract, and it is inside a computer, and making those connection points of how things are behaving or responding or what's going on can be a little challenging. I know, I'm a very visual learner. Maybe that's not a thing, but it's kind of the way I think of the world. But because of that, I know when I see things acted out by actual characters, it really makes a lot larger impression. And not only that, it also allows me to, mix up the lesson kind of flow, so that if you're in 20 minutes into a lesson where kids have kind of like disengaged from wanting to watch any more videos from me, although how could you not love to see me, that once they kind of like go through that, you might want to interrupt them with like an offline activity, get everyone standing up and doing something different. A great resource for this that most CS instructors probably know of is csunplugged.org. I have some of my own unplugged activities that I've created in my curriculum, and I'll be continually adding more to this. I know Cheryl's used a few of these, and so maybe you want to tell us a bit about kind of how they worked out for you, and before we move on to the next one.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to add to is I think number 5 links really well with number 1. Having these physical activities maybe being the introductory activity, and I didn't bring it up at the beginning because I didn't want to steal the thunder of number 5, but you can link this. The way I fit these in is my school has early outs every Wednesday, so I have a shortened class period Wednesday, so we don't get on the computers on Wednesdays, and we try to incorporate some sort of physical activity. It allows for some types of students to be more successful or to see a concept in a better way. So the first one we used, and actually the photo at the very beginning of his slideshow, was my students working on the scavenger hunt. And that was a great way to introduce itch and just the dashboard. I think a lot of students, so here you can see one of my students taking over my computer to show us something he found in the scavenger hunt. And it was really fun. I actually would love to add to it, or maybe do it more than once. So when we transition between different courses and I'm adding new skills, do a second scavenger hunt just to remind kids where things are hidden in Scratch, and how we can use itch and the tools of itch, making sure my students know, where do you find the videos of Jason? Where do you find resources? How do you submit your assignments? So helping my kids continue to remember those skills. But then as introductory activities, he has on here the messaging unplugged. That's a very fun call and response, and helps students see the link between having your program send a message and having that result in some sort of action in the characters. And it can be a very fun and silly game where students are all given a message or something that they're supposed to do if they receive a certain message, and then I can send messages. And if there's if they don't hear me say their specific message, so if I say dog and you're supposed to bark whenever you hear the word dog, I can say pretty funny sentences and get a few kids barking and another kid sighing heavily and another kid standing up, and those different messages, and getting kids to link that concept away from the computer. And there's lots of different ways. Like he said, CS Unplugged is a great resource for this. And and using it or balancing it as either an introductory activity or, maybe one day a week, trying to get your kids off the computers and show them that these concepts can actually apply and help them or they already exist in a lot of what they already do.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Cheryl. And the end goal, obviously, out of all that is just getting the kids engaged. And so I think different ways of interrupting their thoughts, and they seem to, if you do anything, I think, is it more than 10 minutes, kids switch off or something like that? So
yeah, actually, if you talk to them, they say for 2.5 minutes now, if
wow.
it's just you talking.
Yeah.
So it's pretty scary to think that, we barely have time to give directions, let alone teach directly.
Yeah, and that's why I try to keep all my videos actually under 3 minutes now. I guess with if I have to start doing Vine time, I have to have 8-second videos, which would be crazy. Okay, so the next item I have is to share the projects in a group, and I think most teachers probably know kind of like the collaborative or sharing nature. I let kids volunteer to do this at the end of each class. And so I'll just have each course work area up on a projector, and the kids just one at a time come up, and I make sure I'm sitting far away from the computer at that point so that I'm not able to do like any driving or be involved at all, and let them kind of run the class as they go through, kind of showing what they have. It's a good idea to have a few questions that you might preload kids with, sort of, for instance, like, what did you discover that was most interesting, or which blocks did you find were the most fun to sort of change your program's behavior? One other model that also works if you've got a fairly kind of like conservative or reserved class is to actually have them share just in the course work area, and not necessarily have to come up to the front of the room. So have them as one of the activities that they have to go and look at 2 other kids' projects, and actually, go in and kind of like, share projects directly with each other. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, so I won't go too much into that right now. But, the end of the energy level of the classroom, seeing all these silly projects in a group, really gets them excited to come in and make something even better next time when they come into the next class. So it's kind of a good exit from the classroom and prep them for the next time they come in.
Yeah. And again, I keep saying this, but all teachers know, and I think good teachers know, that having an authentic audience is key to student success. If there's not a real reason for them to do what we're asking them to do, they won't do a very good job. And having an authentic audience of entertaining your peers, or creating an advertisement for this chip company, and then sharing advertisements, creating Super Bowl ads for next year's Super Bowl, and whoever can get the most entertaining ads, we vote and pick our top classroom ad. And having those authentic audiences and that real share time, that publication of what we've produced, certainly keeps kids more engaged. They want to make their peers laugh. They want to have a fun time. Some of my students actually even went the opposite way than laughter, but really had public service announcements that were about suicide, and they made a very serious, authentic project because it was creative, but then to be able to share that with their peers, and it became very impactful. So I think giving them that opportunity to share is key. I definitely agree when Jason says to give them the opportunity to share in a less maybe intimidating method, especially at first when the kids are still getting used to this. It's just like, pair share before we go to full class speeches or something. We want our kids to have the opportunity to share in small groups. I always provide my students with a rubric for a major project before it's due. And I often have them, whether that's in English for an essay, grade another students using the rubric, or grade your own using the rubric. But the same applies here. Having the rubric or a checklist for kids to go through with a partner, or having them respond with a couple questions to a partner, or brainstorming. It's just like the drafting process in any class. And so bringing in groups or partners in order to draft or revise, and thinking of it in that same way has been very successful. And then after a few times, there's always a few students who want to share. And once a couple share, then typically we can get the whole class to share and have a very successful and fun kind of celebration.
Yeah, I found at the younger grade levels, it's kind of interesting to have them line up to share. And so there's always a couple that want to. They're like, oh, my project's awesome, so I'm going to show it to everyone.
Yeah.
But as soon as anyone sees that there's a couple of people that are going to do it, then pretty soon I almost end up with like half the classroom lined up. And typically I run out of time to get through the sharing. So it's something also that I've been like, how do I actually get through without disappointing some of the kids that end up being like at the back of the line? Maybe I should reverse the line or something.
That's the way about trying to have kids, each student needs to watch 3 other projects. So then everybody gets theirs watched and everybody gets to see 3 others, because class time certainly comes down to one of the issues usually. Yeah. It's also a great time. This is kind of an odd pitch, but a great time to invite a administrator or a coworker in to see what your kids are doing. Yeah. I know in elementary level, there's a lot more publishing parties and those kinds of things. This is a great parent day activity to have a couple students share their projects so parents can see the cool work you're doing in class, because these really are very creative. And especially because with Itch, the way it works, you can have the project, but you can also show the parents the thinking that went into it in that side panel of showing the work. And so I think it's a great way to show parents the cool things you're doing in your classroom that can relate to real life skills, especially with the little guys. I think this is a very exciting, successful thing. So maybe parent-teacher conferences, having them show off their work.
Yeah, and or putting some of those projects even up on a library page and sharing it out. We'll talk more about some sharing later. One other thing I wanted to add to what you were saying that I thought of while you were talking there, Cheryl, was one class did do like you said, a chip commercial, Sun Chip commercials, and when the teacher kind of pulled up the Sun Chip's Facebook page. And showed them some of the actual commercials that they had. The kids were like, well, the stuff we've created is pretty equivalent and in some cases more creative and fun. And so they probably should submit their Scratch projects to Sun Chips and see if they might want to buy some of them. So, that's pretty powerful for the kids to realize, what they're learning and how, it can apply to real world, just like you said.
Well, and, if we add in that cross-curricular notion, so that's something I've been working on my entire career. And, Sun Chips are a great example. The students could have included nutritional facts. Maybe they had to research 3 nutritional facts and put those into their commercial. Or you could have the actual techniques of persuasion, right? So are you using ethos or pathos or logos? So looking at the ways you are integrating a lot of different concepts into one assignment using computer science, it can be very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to make sure we get through all of our bullet points that we have here. So the next one on our list is something that I brought over from the computer science industry. And I think a lot of computer science instructors now are doing this as well. It's kind of caught on. I think, honestly, I feel like I was talking about this and doing this before I even heard of it anywhere else. But I think as we've got more folks that have industry computer science experience out there in the field with the classrooms, that they've brought this pair programming into the classrooms. And so I'll just spend a minute just to talk about what that it really entails. It's essentially putting 2 kids, and if you really get a little crazy, you can do as many as 3, but typically it's 2 on a computer. And there's a lot of reasons why we do that when we're coding in industry. And that is because the person who is sitting there, you have one person as, we call it the driver and the passenger, or the navigator. So you have basically the navigator and the driver, and they swap roles. So the one person is not touching the computer at all, and the other is using the mouse and the keyboard. So typically the person who's driving will make a lot of little errors here and there, or will be thinking kind of about the task at hand. Whereas the navigator or the observer typically is kind of like processing the information differently. They're watching what they're doing and they're thinking more broadly about the entire activity. And so because of that, the code and the projects that are created, they're able to be a lot less what we call bug-free, and also a lot more expressive and creative, because they're thinking, well, oh, he's doing this right now, but while he's in the process of kind of getting that bit of code to work, the other kid's sitting back thinking, oh, it would be really great if we added this weird sprite that looked like this into this. Or, oh, you made a mistake right there. We should correct that now because we're going to go to a different screen and we won't see it. So there's a lot of, you actually has been shown through industry that it's actually faster and produces better results to have two people work as one. And so that's very often a lot of companies do that in programming. There's a couple of benefits for classrooms too, and I'll just mention them briefly. The need for computers goes down dramatically, so you can use half the number of laptops. If you are using my system and you have maybe some bandwidth issues at the school, you're only streaming half the number of video streams. The kids maybe are sharing through a dongle splitter headset where they're both listening to the same video. So your classroom bandwidth requirements can be addressed by having both kids on the same computer. I think that's mostly what I wanted to mention on it. I don't know, Cheryl, if you've seen other things or tried this out much in your classes. I know when I come there, I kind of typically try to do that. But your kids are they're a lot of independent learners, so it's sometimes a bit of a challenge getting them paired at all.
Actually, your last bullet point here is the one I would like to highlight. We all have an expert kid who can drive us crazy. And so giving them a task can be really beneficial to the overall feel of your classroom. Also, we're not typically the computer science experts in our classroom. I know I certainly am not. Having high school kids who are alternative learners, some of my kids are incredible programmers. They've already taken class at like actual digital institutes like DigiPen. So they know what they're doing sometimes with coding. And so using that and calling on your kids to be leaders provides very interesting opportunities for sometimes kids who wouldn't be a natural leader in another classroom. And so pulling on those expert kids, one thing that I think is very helpful and kind of makes sure that the partnerships are on task is providing them with some sort of actual physical handout. So, you could have subtitles of what does my partner do well? And as they're, watching and working with their partner, the student who is the passenger could be, listing a few compliments for their partner. They're really creative, and I like the sprite that they chose to use. Or he does a really good job listening to my suggestions about color scheme. But then also they could add questions. As a group, they have a log of what they need to do next. And oftentimes, I think that by working with a partner, there's a push to continue a project and continue to improve it because you have two kids looking for ways to make it better. Whereas sometimes when students work individually, or probably predominantly in my class, they work individually, they might just be, okay, that's good enough, I'm done. And with partners, they continue to revise and come up with more ideas. And so I do think it can be very powerful. I also think for the beginning projects, it can help some of the kids who are more tentative. I think the younger kids are less likely to have decided they're not computer people. But the time you get to older students, students have been told, oh, you're just not very good at math, or, oh, you're just not very strong in English. They've made up their minds about what they're good at by the time they're 16. And they'll say things like, oh, I'm just not a computer person. Well, unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. You don't get to choose to not be a computer person because every job you go into is going to require that you use some sort of computer science. So getting kids to actually work together can help overcome some of that anxiety for my students who feel like they're not computer people, and help them realize that they really can do this, especially if they have a strong partner who can assist them.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great points. I love hearing kind of like the things that you bring to your class, and kind of like how you manage to kind of get your kids working well together. So it's kind of exciting, and I hope I can bring some of those skills when I go into the classroom as well. So that's our 7 tips for success. So what's this? Oh, we've got a bonus idea. Well, I guess we couldn't just go with 7, so I had to throw in a number 8. And I think this one really comes into play because of the world we live in today. We're trying to continually work out how to, include the social networking aspect into our classroom, but we're also afraid of it. And so one thing I like to bring here is, we need to do it in a structured and safe way. So encourage the social networking aspect that your kids are already, doing like crazy out there. But when you bring it into the classroom, you have to do it in a way that's safe, or at least somewhat restricted to the class that you're working with. So in Itch, we have ways of doing that. We show all of the kids' projects in one area. They can all comment. They can actually remix each other's projects. So for instance, sometimes I might have them look inside each other's projects and learn from each other, like, comment back on 2 other projects of something that you learned from looking at the code inside this one. And so they have to, as an activity, go in, find a couple of projects that they like. They might actually play a game of their friends, and then look at the code and say, oh, how did they do that? What is, and then they actually learn from each other and try to give them, useful and positive ways of structuring their feedback. Don't just let them say, well, that thing sucks, or this is, not so good. Give them like positive framework comments. One of the ones I have listed here is like, I like it when you did blah, and have you considered such and such. So it's kind of like, it's constructive, but it's also affirmative, right? And so you get, if you kind of like try to get the kids to do commenting in a respectful and positive manner. Obviously, as a teacher, you can always go in and delete some of those if you need to, if they don't match up. But we try to encourage that social learning inside Itch. And it really is, building on that pair programming model where you're learning from a single peer. You're now learning from the entire classroom. And if you have multiple classes, you can actually learn from all of the kids that are in your school. You can learn from their activities.
I actually have a really fun activity that I did that I've now used in a lot of different classes. I have kids tweet their comments, and we don't use real Twitter because we have it blocked on the school system, unfortunately. But I have them use the framework for Twitter, and there's a few reasons for that. One, it keeps your comments small, right? You only get 140 characters or 160 characters, 140, sorry, to comment back to somebody. And then before we start the project, we actually brainstorm a bunch of hashtags. And so the kids have a list of hashtags that they can choose from that include things, related to editing, but also include just compliments. And it becomes a really fun activity. And students fill out forms for each other as they view each other's projects. And then they need to write a tweet to each person. And I do certainly give them sentence starters, but after the first few times of doing this, the kids know what they're doing. And it becomes very entertaining to see kids, counting their letters and fitting everything on this one little, plaque of paper. I think I print 6 of them on one piece of paper. So they're real, note card sized notes. I, of course, can flip through them, but then I can give the kid, here's a stack of tweets about your project. You could have them comment straight into the Itch framework with those tweets. But having those kind of prepackaged hashtags attached, so the kids kind of have an idea of where they can take their comment. So if you have hashtag things to reconsider, well, then the kids can all try to write one reconsider tweet to your peers today. Yeah. And by the end of the class, everyone needs to do at least one reconsider or everyone needs to identify one creative aspect. And so hashtag super creativity. And so everybody's trying to go around and come up with a comment that identifies really cool creativity that then we can share with the whole class. And again, those can be posted or they can be physically, digitally put into the actual projects.
Very cool. I love it. I'm going to use that for sure. I have to maybe put some hashtags in as one of my next features in Itch. I can see having discussion social channels that maybe we use that, and we could actually just kind of build a virtual hashtag system even. So if I
well, and it allows me to direct the comments a little, right? So I do get a little more say in the types of comments they leave if I get to restrict you have to relate to these 6 hashtags.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it there for today. So if we maybe just have a quick wrap up, if you have any final thoughts, Cheryl, otherwise I'm going to leave everyone with, essentially some homework that I'd like you to do. I'd like folks, if you're watching this video on YouTube, or if you're in one of my bootcamp courses, please go in and put in at least a couple of your ideas that get the kids going with coding in your classroom and things that you've found that work, and we can share that with each other. So all the teachers that I'm sure are out there that have fantastic ideas, I'd love to hear them, and I'd love to be able to incorporate some of them and share them with even more teachers. So with that, unless Cheryl, you had anything else you wanted to?
No, thanks a lot for your support at my school and just for the opportunity. I continue to grow, and it just takes a little bit of courage because it is intimidating. But once you get going, it gets easier. And I just encourage teachers to think of the great things you're already doing in your classroom. If you're the type of teacher that's looking for solutions, then you're probably a good teacher. And so you're already doing great things. And so start finding ways to bring that into computer science.
Okay, great. Thanks again, Cheryl. So please go in and put in your comments in the discussion board or under this video. And please remember to share my GoFundMe program, GoFundMe/Ucodemy, with your teacher friends or with your family so that we can bring Itch and coding to even more schools. So again,
parent-teacher associations, that's how my school's funding it. Parent-teacher groups.
Thanks, Cheryl. Okay, everyone, that's it for today, and I'll meet up with those in the bootcamp tomorrow. Thanks.